There's a lot of spending and so on associated to a war that expands aggregate demand. Okay, so for the US, this was expansionary. I mean, it's not a reason to go to war, but it was expansionary. Military expenditure is G. Okay. Okay, good. So today we're going to finish this part on technological progress, and by raising apparent contradictions, which we will resolve over time during this lecture. But we concluded the previous lecture claiming, and rightly so, that over the long term, the only really source of growth of output per capita is really technological progress. So, and that sort of to a first order is true, and so almost anything you do that in terms of economic policy that hurts technological progress ends up being bad. In the short term, perhaps there are trade-offs, but in the long run, that lesson tells you, be careful with that. It's almost always a bad thing. Now, the contradiction or the seeming contradiction is a drawing like that one, no? That drawing here, who knows what this is? Well, I mean, it could be anything, but the point is, this is one portrait from sort of about the Luddites. The Luddites were 19th century English men working on the textile industry, and what they're doing there is they're essentially destroying weaving machines, okay? And so, and the idea was that, well, these machines were being seen as taking their jobs, and so as a very negative thing. So this here you have technological progress. Unlike what our model concluded in the previous section, these people look pretty unhappy about it. And if you come to today, there is a similar situation. There's an enormous concern with robotization. There are lots of people that are very worried about robots replacing jobs. And a similar phenomenon applies to international trade. Many people worried about opening to international trade because the Chinese will take all the US jobs. But that's like technological progress. I mean, you have a huge amount of workers that can do certain things that in the past you had to do by yourself. Okay, so there is a sense that while the long run lesson may be right, well, in the long run we're all dead. What happens in the short term? And that's what I want to talk about today. So let's try to understand why these things may be happening. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just use sort of the macro models we have already used in the course to show you that, at least from a macro point of view, this is not justified. Okay? I'm not going to leave the concerns unanswered. I'm going to get to something that, but at least from the macro point of view, you'll see the concerns do not seem to be justified. So we certainly know that they're not justified from the long-term perspective, because that's the thing that makes per capita income grow. So, but let's look in the short term. Can something go wrong in the short term as a result of technological progress? Okay. And the first thing we're going to do is sort of go to the very short term. And I think the very short term shows very much something that concerns lots of people. In fact, so much so that the French sort of went through a major labor market reform, which ended up being a disaster after 10 years, but precisely because they thought about the problem in these terms. Okay, what is these terms? Well, these terms is the variables that we're able to determine here. Well, the interest rate, but that was easy because the central bank pinned it down. What was the other variable we care a lot about that was pinned down by this model? Output. This was about determining output. Okay, good. So why is it that you should be worried if you look at an expression like this? Again, the French were very worried when they look at an expression like this. When you think about technological progress. Where does technological progress show here? Do you see technological progress anywhere? Here. Don't look there. There. That's a model you know well. Where is technological progress? In those equations. Good answer. Nowhere. Okay? I don't see technological progress anywhere. Why is that a problem? if I want to think about technological progress? Well, because this means that I can, you want to give.
Because it reduces consumption as well?
It also determines consumption. No, well, in this little model, it doesn't really show anywhere. So that's the answer I want. We're fine there. But I now want to make the point that this is a problem. It could be a problem. The French thought this was a huge problem. Why is that? Well, because I can pin down output from here. Well, but output is not produced out of nothing. It's produced with workers. Okay, so let's go to a very simple production function. I'm looking at the short run, so I'm not going to put capital here. Capital is something that matters over the long term. When we look at the short term, we don't care too much about capital accumulation from the supply side. We care about it from the demand side, investment and stuff like that. But let me look at it from the supply side. Well, this output, whatever it is determined by the demand side of the model. That's what the SLM model is, a model of aggregate demand. Whatever output is determined here, well, now has to be produced by workers. Well, this output is pinned down by this block here. What happens if A goes up? N has to go down. Okay, so this is a source of concern. If output is somehow determined by the demand side of the model or the economy, and suddenly you find a more productive way of producing things, people are demanding 100 units of goods. Now you find a way to double the productivity of workers. Well, you need half of the workers to produce that same amount of output. Okay, and I would say most of the sort of negative macro views about technological progress have sort of this idea in mind. Is I say, well, you know, somehow if we can produce twice as many things as in the past, well, there's not going to be demand for those things, so you have to get rid of workers to get there. Okay? So that's, I think, is the root of most of the macro concern for technological progress. Some view like this, that output is somehow determined by something else. We have a model for that, the aggregate demand, and then an increase in technology for a given level of output will lead to a decline in employment. So what the French did to deal with this is they reduced their work week from 40 hours a week, I think they even had 35 by then, to 30 hours a week. Because the idea was to say, okay, well, everyone works a little less, but then therefore we'll get more people employed. Okay? But that was the logic. Now, the first thing I mean, suppose that you are in charge of this economy. The French had a little point there because they weren't fully in charge of their economy. You know, they're part of a community and so on. But what would you do there? I mean, suppose that you suddenly have this great technology, and that it is true that output is determined by aggregate demand, and suddenly you discover this great technology. Do you get rid of the technology, or you say, no, let's ignore it, otherwise we'll generate unemployment? What sounds like a better thing to do now that you have taken 1402? Exactly. Do something that expands aggregate demand or cut interest rates. If you have a space to cut interest rate, then that's what you should do. Accommodate the technological progress by some sort of aggregate demand policy. So if that's a constraint, there are better ways to deal with it than just not letting technological progress happen. Okay? So that's not really a concern there. Now, we are taking, so that's one point. Second point is, well, we're really taking these equations too literally. Remember, we then expanded this model and we put sort of future variables matter a lot. This was a very static model, but obviously future variables matter a lot. And that's when, if you think about technological progress, probably it's not true that this block will remain constant. Okay? Because future output is likely to change. So, for example, if technological progress is sort of new ideas and suddenly everything becomes more productive and so on, it's very likely that workers here are going to expect higher wages in the future, higher income and so on, because growth is coming as a result of more technological progress. If that's the case, then, and we have sort of a more dynamic model in which you have future income also as argument of aggregate demand, as we did have a model like that a few lectures ago, then it's very likely that this demand will also shift to the right. Okay, so that's sorry. So there you have it. So the experiment I just ran on you was one in which we kept the aggregate demand completely fixed. Did not respond to technology. Sorry for this A prime. These are not technological progress. These are points. Okay, But I just ran the experiment for you in the case in which we don't move aggregate demand when technological progress rises. Well, then if output stays constant, then it has to be the case that employment comes down. But suppose that actually that people become very optimistic now because we all have become very productive, and therefore they expect future income to go up. Then we know that in this space of current income and interest rate, the aggregate demand will move to the right. Yes, will move to the right. No? Consumers will consume more for any given level of current income because they expect future income to be higher. Firms are going to invest more for any given level of current sales because they know that a lot of demand is coming to them in the future. So that will shift this to the right. Now, if this shift here is proportionally more than, say, suppose that A increased by 5%, the technology increased by 5%, if this shift to the right is more than 5%, then you get the opposite implication, that technological progress actually increases employment rather than decreases employment. Okay? But you could also imagine situations of technological progress where things move the other way around. And in fact, when people think about sort of international trade, sometimes that's the case, in the sense that suppose that technological progress means essentially that lots of substitute of things that you currently do emerge that are more efficient. Well, there can be a lot of uncertainty for workers that they're going to lose their jobs or something like that, in which case aggregate demand may go inwards. And then you get the two kicks. You get the kick of the production shifting up and the kick of aggregate demand coming down. So as a matter of theory, it could go either way. I can construct models in which things can go any way I want. It's not unambiguous that technological progress will reduce employment. It depends on how much does output expand relative to the increase in technological progress at the end of the day. If you look at the evidence, just bad evidence, meaning just plot things, if you just plot actually the rate of growth of output and the rate of growth of technology, things look very promising because the rate of growth of output, first of all, they commove very much. The rate of technological progress moves very much with the rate of growth of output. But what you see is that output tends to move more than technological progress most of the time. Okay, so, and in the same direction. So it's typically the case that, you know, for an expansion in TFP of 1%, technological progress is very procyclical. That's what I'm trying to say. It's very, at the business cycle frequency, if technological progress moves by 1%, accelerates by 1%, output growth typically goes up by 1.3, 1.4%. Okay? So it seems to be really sort of output employment increasing at the business cycle frequency. Now, the book does the right thing here. It says, well, but be careful. This evidence is not really all that good. And the reason it's not all that good is that the causality runs the other way around. What we do know is that measured productivity rises whenever output rises. But it's not because productivity necessarily increases output, but it's because of what we know as labor hoarding. I mean, companies don't hire and fire all the time. What they do is you know, they do hire and fire all the time, but they don't do as much as they would do if they didn't do what is called labor hoarding. So a company, you know, hire workers, and these workers sort of learn how to do their jobs with the company. They're specialized in the company to some extent. So if the temporary downturn comes down and the firm thinks that can survive that, it probably won't fire all those workers because it will lose a lot of expertise. So what we will do instead is we'll cut production, so not to spend on materials and stuff like that, but it will keep a large share of the workers in the company. And as a result of that, measured productivity comes down. It's not that each worker became less productive, but the company decides to, you know, take a few workers and just keep them in park at the company. And that's what, so measured productivity tends to be procyclical for that reason. And then when the recovery happens, aggregate demand recovers and so on, the company doesn't need to hire as many workers to increase production because it had lots of workers parked inside the firm. And therefore, measured productivity tends to go up. And so this plot is very misleading because it's polluted by that effect I just described. Now, many people have tried to cleanse that effect. And what you find once you cleanse that effect is that, as with the theory, the results are ambiguous. There are some cases of technological progress where employment rises as a result of it, and there are some cases it goes down. But on average, it's about zero. Okay, so in the short run, there isn't much of a correlation between true technological progress. Actually, it's slightly positive, but it's not as positive as in this case. But it's very ambiguous. So if it was just based on this evidence or on this model, sort of the plot of the Luddites that I show you sort of would not be justified in the sense, at least collectively. So society should not go against technological progress because it's not true that in the short term generates typically higher unemployment. Okay? So that's the first point. So over the short run, there isn't evidence for that. And again, the little evidence we have is that many things can happen. It depends on the specific form of technological progress we have. Then from the wage setting equation, we get that the workers demand something that is exactly as we used to have, but it's also increasing in productivity. Okay, we made that assumption. Well, you already know the answer, therefore, with this model for the medium-term effect of productivity on unemployment, which is what? So how do I find the natural rate of unemployment in this expanded model? Well, I set the wage that firms are willing to pay equal to the wage that workers want. So that means this wage has to be the same as that, so this guy here has to be the same as that. So what happens? How does the unemployment rate depend on technological progress? Increases. Do I get a decrease somewhere? Okay. Exactly. Okay, good. Exactly. So if this is equal to that, that guy cancels with that, and therefore the natural rate of unemployment is exactly the same as the one we used to have there. Of course, there are assumptions here, but here is a pretty sensible model in which workers demand that they get paid the technological progress. Okay? If they demand less than that, then it goes the other way around. Then actually unemployment decreases. But if they demand that all the technological progress goes to them, okay, still you don't get the unemployment rate to go up in this model, the natural rate of unemployment, and that's what you have. So if you look here, now there you have the old equilibrium. Now you have technological progress. Firms are willing to pay a higher wage, but workers also demand a higher wage. And so wage setting equation moves to the right, and we end up at the same equilibrium as before. Higher real wages, here the real wage absorbs the increase in productivity 1 for 1. Okay? And unemployment, the natural rate of unemployment remains unchanged, which tells you that whatever happened in the short run model that we used before eventually will go away in this case. Okay? Either whether it was created more unemployment, less unemployment, whatever, in this model, this view of the world in which we're giving all the technological progress to the workers, we're not generating higher unemployment. So from this model, it doesn't seem very justified either. From this model, it doesn't seem to be justified, all the whining about robots and technology and so on. Now, what about the data? What do we observe in the data at medium frequency, meaning in the medium run, which I'm going to capture it in a simple way, which is you take just a decade average of unemployment, changes in technology and unemployment. So here you have the average unemployment rate, and this is the average rate of growth of labor productivity over decades, different decades. And here you don't see much correlation in the data, not much. If you remove the Great Depression, which probably this data are polluted because the Great Depression was very long and that unemployment is not medium-term unemployment, it's really recession-type unemployment, then you see that what you have is a weak correlation, but if something actually is negative, not positive. Okay? So here you see that periods with fast technological progress tend to be also periods with lower unemployment. One way of rationalizing that with the model we have is that, again, these are 10-year averages. And 10-year average includes some short-term and all that stuff. And think what happens if productivity growth is happening at a certain pace and then it slows down. Well, if workers don't see it immediately and they still expect productivity growth to remain at the old level, then that means in this diagram, so suppose that technological progress is happening at the rate of 3% per year, and then every single year we were getting this price setting equation going up by 3%, the wage setting equation going up by 3%, and unemployment staying put. Suppose now that it slows down to 2%, 1.5% technological progress. Then the price setting equation, which is sort of day to day, will go up by only 1.5%. But the wage setting equation will still go up by 3.5% because expected rate of growth is 3%. Well, that means that in the short term, you're going to get more unemployment. Okay? And so this probably captures what happens when technological progress accelerates, Steel workers don't get all the raise that comes from that because they have to sort of internalize expectations. So wages are lagging a little behind. As a result of that, you tend to see unemployment go down, and the other way around when as in this example, when technological progress decelerate. But the bottom line again is that if you look at these pictures, the argument is not there either. And if you look at the data or you look at models, the argument is not there. And if something, the evidence we seem to have, at least for the US, is that technological progress we can talk about that, but that's a different story. Isn't a clear evidence or models that suggest that the short-term impact or medium-term impact on unemployment can be very, very high. Is that the workers that were great at producing with the old technology may not be the same workers that are great at producing with the new technology. So there are winners and losers all the time, okay? And so even though on average things are very good, there can be sort of big losers in all these things. And the same happens with international trade. It's quite clear that regardless of what Trump may say, that international trade does lots of good things on average, but there are losers. And they're big losers. In fact, all the fundamental theorems of international trade says, well, you should compensate the losers. And then you can make them Pareto. I mean, the decision of society of compensate or not, that's a political decision. But the theorems of international trade that said trade is good in a Pareto sense, meaning everyone can be better off, require certain transfers, which in practice seldom happen. But I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I'm saying the theorem tells you this can be good for everyone only if the guys that win a lot compensate a little bit the guys that lose, okay? So clearly, that's not the way it really happens, that compensation is never full. And so this churning, it's called the churn, this process of creative destruction, is creating continuously winners and losers, okay? And it's very natural that when technology process accelerates, sort of the pace of that goes faster. And so you see more winners and losers in the short run, and that can create lots of confusion. Here I pick, this is a long table, but I didn't want to, I mean, it's a long table, but I show you, illustrate a little bit some examples. These are sort of major technologies that really sort of completely change the type of skills you needed. So when the automobile was invented, well, the type of labor you need to build autos is quite different from the one you needed to produce the substitutes of auto, no? Boat, train, the carriage. I mean, you need a lot fewer of those once you have cars. And the workers that you need to produce this, I mean, there are some professions here that I don't even recognize. So you know, that's what happens. They become obsolete. But the guy that had the skill, you know, obviously is not going to be very happy about it. And this may be a different set of skills. So now, it may be the case, sometimes it happens that these skills are very aligned, and then the process is very smooth, but sometimes it's not, okay? I mean, it's not very natural, you know, for a railroad worker to become a pilot. So when you go from, you know, when airplanes become sort of a massive product, then, you know, employees of the train industry certainly suffer, and certainly for ocean liners. I mean, once transatlantic flights were possible, then certainly that made a huge difference, and so on. I mean, computers. I mean, how many of you knows what a slide rule is? I use one. You know? Okay, good. But have you seen it in reality or at the MIT museum? Okay, good. In any event, but you know, they're sort of these things sort of were very popular. Everyone had one in the past, and now many of you don't even know what it is. Okay, so that's a case of different products, and the skills that you require to produce a computer are very different from the ones that you require to produce a sliding rule. In fact, if you look at terms of jobs, look at this is just one example. Again, I cut the table. It's a long table. Look at job destruction. So railroad employees, in 1920, we have more than 2 million railroad employees in the US. Today, it's 100,000. Okay, so if that was your thing, it's not longer a good thing. Now, this is a long period of time, so people had time to change, but I mean, there are also a bunch of things that don't even exist today. Maybe you have one, you know, at the Plymouth plantation or something like that, but you don't see much of it. It's not the Plymouth plantation. What is it called? The one, Sturbridge Village or whatever? Well, anyways, you will see some of these things, but otherwise, you don't see it. And it's full of it. Look, this is big. Farm workers. Okay? 12 million in 1910, less than a million today. And that is almost entirely a result of technological progress within the farm. Okay? You needed in the past lots of sort of people working in agriculture to produce the things that you can produce today with one big truck, okay? Or fertilizers. There are lots of things that you can do today that couldn't do in the past. And so this is a case in which fast technological progress indeed reduced dramatically the number of workers that you use in that industry. But they are being employed somewhere else. Perhaps not the same people, that's the issue. Okay? And so here you see the other things, job creation, for example. Airplane pilots and mechanics, well, there were none in 1900. Now you have 260. Auto mechanics, none in 1900, 900 today. Engineers, I mean, big changes and so on. Drivers, I mean, none in 900. You have 4 million drivers in the US.
That either we're retraining everyone who lost their job due to technology, or that we have enough people to replace new workers, to replace the ones that...
For sure. For sure. And I mean, probably if this was a class in which I wanted to develop more the labor market, I would get into search models in which you can have shortages in certain industries. So you see the wage going up a lot in certain, I want to say a little bit about that for a while. So you have bottlenecks on certain things. Wage goes up, then people start studying for that thing, and then the transition happens. So all these things add certain dynamics and so on. But the big picture type thing I gave you with the macro models, that captures what happens, and then how much time do you need? Well, it varies. It varies depending on how innovative is the thing and what kind of shortages you have or not. But just to give you a sense of the order of magnitude of what happens in an economy like the US. In manufacturing, for example, which is a small sector nowadays in the US, about 12%, I'm making up these numbers, but they're about right. And at one point I did know these numbers. About 12% of the jobs that exist at the beginning of the year do not exist at the end of the year. And about 12% of the jobs that exist at the end of the year were not available at the beginning of the year. Okay, so you see massive flows of jobs. If you look at workers, it's even higher. I mean, worker mobility is just enormous in the US. It's just incredible. I mean, you know, it's the order of 20% or 30% people change jobs in any given year. Okay. Still, many of those are flows within the same industries. They're not really across big technological things and so on. But this is really a reason why I think you get this. I mean, if you are in one industry here, no, it's going to be pretty painful if this transition happens very fast and you have no skill to go there. In fact, there is a lot of evidence. There is a box actually in the book, I think it's at the end of this slide, that shows that, you know, most people that lose their jobs out of a large event, meaning something like the company close because, you know, the product is no longer useful or something like that, see sort of a permanent effect on their income, negative effect on their income, okay? Because, you know, if it is an accident that, you know, the guy, the CEO of the company was corrupt and boom, that's the reason the thing disappeared, but the product is still useful and so on, that's not the case. But if it is because the product became obsolete, then most of the work, on average, the workers there will have a permanent effect, lower effect in lower income. Okay, we will have a big decline initially, then they will be reabsorbed in different sectors, different companies and so on, but at a lower wage than they used to have. Okay, so that's happening all the time. Now, wages on average are going up, so that means that some other people are making a lot of more money than they used to. And in fact, one thing that is very clear in the US, it's all around the world, but there's something very clear, is that the newer technologies are having much more skill intensive than the older technologies, high education intensive at the very least. So you see that the differential of the wage differential between sort of people with advanced degrees, college, and less than high school, this is all normalized by high school wages, has been growing quite dramatically since the early 80s. Okay. The truth is that already technological progress before that was very skill bias, education bias, I think. But at that point, very few people were educated, and wage differential became large, not nearly as large as that, but it became large, and sort of there was a massive entry into college and so on and so on because the reward was pretty high. And for a while that sort of contained the differential. There was a differential, but it was fairly contained. But nowadays, sort of, you know, there are lots of people here, and so there isn't that much space for this quantity effect. And you have seen sort of pretty dramatic increases in inequality. And of course, if you are in industry, you are a person in this space, you're not going to be very happy about what is going on. Okay. And again, one of the main explanations for this is that technology has become more sort of education intensive than otherwise. Yeah.
So I noticed that all the values seem to converge around 1.0.
No, that's a normalization of something. Yeah. I mean, this is here. No, but this is just noise. I think that this is a normalization. Yeah. No, levels have always been different. No, yeah, that's important. This is a normalization.
You're saying at 1980,
Huh?
At 1980.
They all converge around at 1980.
Is that because it's like nominal wage?
Oh, but here you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. That's an accident. I don't know. It's a good question. Probably there's some rounding error here. I don't know. You know, the red line is not exactly there. I don't know. This may be an optical effect or whatever. I think this normalization is from here, but it is true that sort of things cross back and forth. I mean, you could argue, except for the green one here, they also come. I think that's an accident. I think, but the fact I want to highlight is just that it's very clear that technology has been biased towards educated workers. And among other reasons, because technologies have become flexible technologies, you need sort of to be able to do different things within each job, and this has created enormous inequality. So wage inequality is a big phenomenon right now, and that obviously creates lots of unhappiness in lots of people. Now, a thing that has been even more contentious is this, and I think this is even misleading, but if you look at wealth inequality is even higher. Wealth in the US is very concentrated today, okay, everywhere, but in the US it's very concentrated. So you see what has happened actually with the wealth of the top 1%. So the top 1% of the population in terms of wealth sort of have, this is 2008, today is higher than that actually. It's about 25% of total wealth. And this is very misleading because the 1% includes lots of people that are not very, very rich. If you go to the 0.1%, then this number is not going to drop a lot. You're still going to get like 15% of the wealth is on the hands of the 0.1% or whatever. So that's a different issue, and also has created lots of unhappiness in lots of places and so on. Now, there's something interesting, though, and that may be related to technology, because if you look at, when do you see the sort of these big peaks? You know, we also had an event around here in the early 20s and so on, sort of big. I mean, then they got crushed by the Great Depression, but also you got this sort of very high, and in fact that's true, by the way, here very recently in the Great Financial Crisis, the wealth inequality became a lot better in the sense that they compressed a lot because you know, the value of all the equity and so on that the very rich have sort of declined a lot in value. But these are periods actually happen to coincide with periods of very fast technological progress. Okay, this is sort of the IT revolution and blah, blah, blah. Here you have sort of engines and different technologies, electrical engine and stuff like that, that also sort of led to this big thing. So that's something that tends to happen in the US a lot, is that very fast technological progress, there is a few guys that will come with the idea, they can appropriate the profits from that, and that can produce sort of big inequalities. Now, those things don't last for very long. As you can see, they go away. You need a Great Depression or something like that, but that's a little encouraging in the sense that this is probably a result of this. I mean, you know, Bill Gates, people like that are pulling this stuff up. But then it tends to mean revert, but not so. But anyways, so this is certainly this is technology. There is an argument that technology can create lots of inequality. There's no doubt of that. Now, still on average is good. Now the question is, do we find mechanisms to transfer without breaking incentives and so on? That's always a huge issue. No, let me stop there. Okay, good. Good, let me stop here. So in the next lecture, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about, go back to the things we discussed in the course and talk about policy in practice. I mean, what are sort of real obstacles that policymakers face? Okay.